Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cybersecurity Career Talks. I am Niloufer Tamboly, your host, your coach, your teacher on this journey with you, exploring different roles in cybersecurity until you find your dream job. I have with me today Srikanth Nagarajan, and Srikanth was the senior security architect for the city of New York and now leads. And Srikanth now leads two companies, and they have enterprise as well as public sector customers. Srikanth, uh, can you please introduce yourself a little bit?
Thank you, Niloufer. Hi, everybody. Good morning, wherever you're joining from, and good evening if you're joining from India. We really appreciate everybody joining today. Thank you, Niloufer, for setting this Career Talks session. I'm pretty sure a lot of people have found it very useful in the past sessions, and hope we will be very useful for this session as well. So myself, Srikanth Nagarajan, I've been in cybersecurity for the last 20 plus years and done the various roles. I'm sure I, like all of you, rose up the ladder from network administration, network architecture, and moved into cybersecurity and done various roles in cybersecurity architecture, information security management, and advising CISOs on architecture and cybersecurity programs. Right now, I run cybersecurity consulting practice. We have clients in public sector and enterprise. I welcome all of you again and hope we can make it very useful and interactive for you guys.
Srikanth, before we go a little further, let me just share our disclaimer.
Sure, please.
The views expressed in this presentation and during this session are the personal opinions of the participants and do not reflect the official policy or position of their respective employers. This discussion is a volunteer-led effort to contribute to the profession and pay forward the many kindnesses and instances of support and guidance the participants have received during the course of their career. Thanks so much. So take it away, Srikanth. You want to share?
Thank you. I'll start sharing my screen. Once again, welcome all of you. So if there is any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put it in the YouTube chat, and Niloufer will be monitoring that, so then we can get it answered during the course of the presentation. Thank you. So I'd like to start a lot of my presentations on career talks with a small Zen story, right? To emphasize what's important to focus. Basically, there was a martial arts student. He went to his teacher and asked him, I'm learning the martial arts from you. I would also like to learn from another teacher to get better. Like, a lot of us try to focus on too many different things. Like, I want to get better at things. I would let me go this way, that way. So the teacher told that particular student, if you are going to chase two rabbits, you're not going to even catch one, right? So fundamental. Like, I always try to tell people, like, the quality of your life depends on how much you focus on and what do you focus on. And hopefully you guys are here, you're focused on security, and we can help you modify your goals and how you want to accomplish that. So with that, let me go into so I want to set the context here for where the security architect role belongs to. I'm sure we had a lot of talks before talking about various security roles. People are in different positions in their careers, or there's some of myself, including I started from network administration, network architecture background. A lot of people start with application background. They're developers interested in security, they move towards that. Some of them are system administrators, like operating system admins, who are then focused on security. So they move up the ladder, they can get into a security specialist position or an analyst opening or an engineering opening or consultant, things like that. We talk about those things. And then some of the higher level positions, once you get an experience in security field for a 3 to 5 years, now you get into an architecture position. So we'll talk more about what the architect position means, and that's kind of leads you into the higher level openings within security, like Niloufer pointed out in that, the high paying jobs and some of the more responsible positions if you really want to focus and get into security, and these are the openings, right? So these are the different type of security architects that I've seen in the industry. I'm sure there are others too, but typically these are enterprise security architect, which handles an overall business alignment with technology and security. We work in conjunction with enterprise architects, and then you have the infrastructure architects or network security architects who work typically in designing the networks, designing the server infrastructure, data center infrastructure, etc. And then you have application security architects who really focus on applications, who have a development background and they understand how applications are designed, how it can be resiliency can be built in, how various stacks talk to each other, etc. And the new one that currently, which very popular, I'm sure you heard about, it's the cloud security architect. So we'll be talking in detail about some of these, and also especially about the one cloud security architect, which is currently in hot demand, right? So what is the difference between an enterprise architect and a security architect, right? So first, to define an architect, one thing people need to understand what an architect does as an engineer does, right? So a lot of us come from technical background. Some of you may be from more policy or non-technical background, depending on that. But most people coming into the security field I've seen are from technical background. So we have our technical hat on all the time, and we try to design things, or we try to implement things. So the architect typically is not somebody who designs or implement things, or they are one that actually tries to match the business requirements with the technology requirements. So architects plays kind of like a middleman between technology organization and the business organization, trying to match what is really required by the business to accomplish their mission, right? So that is what an architect generally does. And enterprise architects address this from a pure technology perspective all across the organization. They try to align business with IT. And security architecture kind of falls into the same realm in terms of building a relationship between the enterprise architecture team and the security team, and bridge that gap and make sure whatever architecture is built by the enterprise architects and matches the security requirements. So they bring in the security flavor into the job role, right? So that's how typically it works. And they typically have a relationship with enterprise architecture, security teams, the technology operations people. And they also, security architects, keep in touch with the peers in the industry to figure out what current regulations are needed to be understood. They also try to influence the policies that are set in the organization, and so that the architecture is being rolled out as enterprise IT operations, they are secure, right? So that's the goal. So this is a typical two different organizations, how security architects fit into the overall scheme of things, right? One is an organization which has a pure CIO technology stack or technology organization vertical, and the security architect fits into that organization as part of the enterprise architecture. And the security architects try to report to the CISO from a security function perspective, from a dotted line relationship. This happens in slightly medium-sized organizations, right? In a large organization where there's a dedicated security architecture team, it's typically the team itself contains multiple roles within the security architecture, like infrastructure, application security, cloud security, etc. Right? And they actually work with the security architecture, enterprise architecture teams to provide that security purview, if you will, right? So what are some of the skills that are commonly required for a security architect? One of the skills is business and technical skills, right? You need to understand overall risk management. How is there something an organization is undergoing a particular enterprise technology project? What are the risks associated with that particular project or technology that's being utilize. I'll give an example here to drive home the point. Like, for example, let's say there is a financial firm, fictitious firm that we're talking about. They have a specific circuit or a link, communication link. Now, the requirement is that as part of the regulations, they are required to encrypt the traffic, right? And if they bring down the link, the business is going to cost them, you know how trading floors and other things work. The business is going to take a hit of $5 million, right? If they do not do the encryption, they will get a regulatory, potential regulatory penalty of $2 million. Now, I'm going to ask you guys a question. Can you give an advice in this particular situation? What should they be doing? Should they be bringing down the link, enable the encryption, and take the hit of $5 million of business? Or should they be worried about, okay, $2 million of fine, and just say, okay, I'm going to just pay the fine, right? So I would like to hear from you all during this course, if you can just put in your chat windows, what do you think they should be doing, right? So that's part of the risk management aspect of it, right? How would you identify the risk?
So Srikanth, just so everybody knows what the question is, can you just repeat it one more time?
Yeah. So I will repeat the question. So basically, we are talking about a fictitious organization, and they have a requirement to encrypt the communication link in order to comply with the regulation. If they, so the conundrum is now the architecture team is set with this question. If I bring down the link, the business is going to lose $5 million because the trading is lost. If I do not bring down the link, I will be getting a regulatory fine of $2 million. Which option will they select, and what do you think is the right approach? Just to get you guys thinking, give us your feedback on the chat channel, so we'll talk about that scenario.
Sure. And I'm getting like a bunch of questions.
Sure.
One of them is from Riyadh, and he is or she is asking that they are like a certified solutions architect, and what should I do next to start in cloud security? So I don't know, like certified solutions architect.
Solution architects typically are in the enterprise architecture function, if you will. They are doing the next level. So there is the business level architecture, and then there's the technical architecture. So they are in the technical solution architecture phase. The way they can get into security is cloud security is learn the cloud security cloud platforms first, understand how security is implemented them, and learn certain tools and techniques that are required in cloud security, like cloud access security broker, identity and access management within the cloud, single sign-on solutions, and how do you secure containers, for example, and understand the overall threat landscape. If you look at Cloud Security Alliance is one of the organizations that is public organizations that helps understand the overall risks for cloud. I would recommend take a look at that, and maybe you can look at some of the certifications there, or you can look at some of the certifications from ISC, which is like the Cloud Security Professional, CCSP, or so those things will be very valuable for somebody with that background. We already have a technical background.
Sure, and so to your question, Reena says that regulatory is highly critical, so she would go with the.
That's a good answer. There's in that particular situation, there's really no one answer, right? So as a business, that is the kind of questions and decision making that you are faced with, where an architect comes into the play, where they try to match the business requirements with the technical requirements as well as the security requirements. So the business might choose, I'd rather not lose $5 million in my profit, and I still make $3 million, right? And then pay the fine. So that is the kind of business alignment that has to happen. And also figure out, yes, from a long-term perspective, I understand, yes, regulatory is very important. We want to make sure it is regulatory compliance is complied with. But when you're making a decision on a on a particular requirement perspective, you want to consider both sides of the coin. Right? So that's where a lot of times when we wear the technical hat, I have been in that same shoes where as a firewall engineer or a security engineer, we tell them, oh, you cannot open this port, or you cannot, you always, the security department is always called the no department. And I think we have gone from that point to become, I think we need to become the yes department. And how do you do it? Rather than saying no, you all need to learn, I mean, and from a security perspective, learn how to say yes. Oh, by the way, you cannot do that, but you can do this, and come up with a solution. So that's why security people are problem solvers, and security people are solution oriented. So that's some of the technical and the non-technical skills required. Like if you look at it, you also, if you're doing application security architecture, you need to know threat modeling. Threat modeling is a very useful skill, which is very scarce in the market. If somebody can learn that, there's a lot of job opportunities in application security. In fact, one of the presentations, last presentations, were talking about somebody knowing application development can get into this application security architect role. It's a perfect match because people have the right understanding of applications. So threat modeling is basically how a hacker will try to attack the application, and coming up with the various scenarios and designing the solution for that, and providing the prevention mitigation solutions for that, right? So that's the architecture and threat modeling. Some of the non-technical skills, if you look at it, they need to be proficient in reviewing the existing architectures and also be able to rank the risk. Like the scenario we talked about, you have to be able to rank the risks and figure out which risk is of a higher, potential. It is not about vulnerabilities there. That means there is a problem. If you take a server architect, we run the vulnerability scan, there's like hundreds of vulnerabilities. Do we really go and fix everything? It may not be feasible, right? In a real life environment, what are the real exposures? Are we really exposed? And what is the attack surface that is exposed to the outside? And can it happen? And what is the real threat?
Sure.
So we have to take that view as well. Sorry.
So Melvin, I'm just going through a bunch of questions. There are a lot of comments and discussions going on. Sure. So Melvin says, from a business perspective, security products business protects business and data, but profits keep the business running. So
good point. Very good point. That's, at the end of the day, the business exists to be in the, to be available and be in the business of making profits, and to be to be in the community. So if the business doesn't exist, then so that's something we always have to keep in the back of your mind. We exist for the purpose of business, and when you keep that mindset, you're always going to give them a solution that actually enable their business. So you want to make sure cybersecurity is an enabler for business rather than trying to say, oh, you cannot do that, you cannot do that. So that mindset change has to happen, and that will make you a successful security professional, whether you're doing engineering or architecture.
I compare myself when, like, I was a parent of 2 teenage kids, right? Now they have grown. Yeah. But it is like, if you tell them not to do something, then it's not a good thing, right? Because they're going to find ways to do it. So it's better to show them how to do it safely, whatever it is that they are trying to do. Right. And as helping as a business partner, probably security plays that role too. Yeah. Like showing how to do it in a safe manner within budget.
The right approach to do it. And part of that is awareness, creating the awareness within the organization. And that's part of the architecture role also, to create awareness among the various stakeholders to identify why they need to do certain things and what is the real risk and what could potentially happen. So you are the SME from an organizational perspective. So from a certifications for architecture, security architect, I've seen CISSP being one of the very common ones, which allows you to get into security. You need at least 5+ years experience in IT and show some that you have done some security work in different areas, and that allows you to get the CISSP. And CISMs, again, information security management, and certified security knowledge professional, and CCSP. Those are cloud-related certifications, which is more prevalent nowadays, right? Because everybody's moving to the cloud. And again, you need to be more of a self-starter in architecture, because a lot of the things people are bringing in, you have to be able to persuade that the right way of doing things, like you just mentioned, you have to be able to convince people are want to, you're kind of going against the flow because people have a certain flow. They want to do certain things in a certain way because that's the easiest thing to do. But what is the right thing to do is something as a security architect you're going to bring in and say, okay, I think this is the right way to do it and this is the right solution. So you are more of a solution architect and a security architect. You take it, because if you, as a security person, you need to know all the technologies, you need to know all the application, at least at the basic level. You don't have to be in-depth, but you need to know all of that to be able to have a very meaningful conversation with the enterprise architects, right? So these are some of the roles and responsibilities that is associated with the security architect role. They work very closely with enterprise architects. They do business technical artifacts, which means you want to create patterns that are reusable security architecture solutions. So that when a business is trying to do something, like let's say they want to do remote access, you come up with an architecture blueprint for remote access, especially during the COVID. What are the various risks? You try to address those risks. People using their own computers at home. What are the risks associated with that? What if that computer doesn't have proper antivirus? How do you check that? And things like that. So this coming up with these various scenarios and potential risks that are to the organization, and designing the solution, working with the technology architects is and then coming up the blueprint and say, so anytime new solutions are being built, use this blueprint. So that way you have already built the knowledge base from your expertise. And you also contribute to overall project and portfolio management within the organization, and research new technologies. So again, you're acting like a R&D for the organization from a security perspective, or the SME. So anything that's new going on, like participating in forums like this, trying to share the knowledge, so you get more information from different forums and be that leader within your organization for security. And you have to be a very good communicator as well, in terms of trying to articulate for non-technical people in some cases what are the technical risks, right? At the other side also, there is a technical people, you have to explain them in a very technical format, what are the risks associated with that, and they may not sometimes see it in the way you're seeing it. So you have to be a really good communicator if you want to be in this role, right? So unless there are any questions, Niloufer, we can get into the frameworks.
Yes, please.
Sure. So what are some of the frameworks? So what is a framework? I'm sure you would have seen various frameworks in IT, right? But what is the purpose of a framework? Framework is, so let's say you're starting to implement security for a particular organization. I mean, there are multiple ways of going about it. I mean, you can go and do an assessment and figure out what's wrong and try to fix it. One of the things that frameworks helps you is to have a very comprehensive view of what needs to be done for an organization. So it's a good starting point for any security program to adhere to a framework. Frameworks are designed based on a couple of things. One is by vertical industries, like if you have health, you have high trust. NIST CSF is a very generic framework available for mid-size to large-size organizations. And then there's a FedRAMP for government-based organizations, which is a framework available. And a lot of organizations, international organizations, use ISO 27001, which is again a program framework, which is very comprehensive. It's very intensive to implement, and there are certifications available to comply with that. It gives the organizations credentials with their customers that their systems are compliant with the ISO framework, right? Some of the other type of frameworks are regulatory frameworks, like certain organizations which are dealing with credit card data. The PCI Standards Council requires certain security requirements to be followed by these organizations that handle credit card, to make sure that consumers' credit card information is protected. Same thing with HIPAA. Any organization dealing with health data, these are government-based regulations, government slash quasi-government regulation. NERC is another one for all electric regulatory authorities, and I'm sure you are familiar with GDPR, which is a overall more of a privacy and a security regulation. So now that other topic is coming in, where we talked about what is the impact of privacy in security. That is also becoming more important. People are more concerned about not just security, but privacy of their information, right? So there's going to be slightly merge of those two fields, but there still is a chief privacy officer in an organization that handles with privacy. But a lot of the security controls need to also address privacy of the information, right? And other control-based framework are more for doing assessments and really technical based framework. Like OWASP is one for application security. OWASP top 10 is very famous to validate whether applications are built to the standard. CIS benchmarks, Center for Internet Security, is one of the very famous benchmarks you can use for server operating system hardening. They give you benchmarks, it's available for free. And I think they also sell you something where you can do an automatic assessment, but it's available for free. You can download and checklist operating system security. Are you doing by the right, by the best practices? All of that is incorporated into that. Another framework is COBIT. I'm sure Niloufer has a lot of background in that. She's a risk professional. COBIT is again IT assurance framework, if you will. Are you doing the right things by IT? It addresses all the audit requirements and assessment requirements from an IT perspective. So those are best practices frameworks from a controls perspective. So I would suggest, as a security architecture professional, you need to know at least one framework in each of those categories. Like NIST CSF is very common. It's very generic. It allows to be extended to various industries. So people don't have any particular framework in their organization, I would recommend just go with the NIST CSF. Unless you are in a specific industry where your high trust is related to health industry, which is very, very active. They have their own cybersecurity framework, high trust framework. But if you are not in any of that, then you can just go with the NIST CSF. We need to know that. I think NIST CSF is the one valuable thing to know. And other than that, depending on the industry, you need to have awareness of the specific regulatory frameworks. And control frameworks, I would recommend OWASP, knowledge of OWASP and CIS. Those two are very valuable.
And the ISO 27001 is also like a very common
Correct.
framework.
ISO 27001 is very commonly implemented for international organizations. Yeah, so that is something, it to get certified in ISO 27001 is a little bit time involved. So if you really want to get into that, you could do that. There's lead auditor certifications for that, and you can really get into that. That in itself is a pure auditing type role that you can get into. But from a security architect, it's good to know that framework because it is very comprehensive. NIST CSF is one good thing about NIST CSF is that it is extensible and it allows you to define profiles on per industry basis. So you can take that and adapt it to whichever industry you're working on, and you can show that that you're following a framework.
True.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And certifications that you would typically you start with the technical certifications like CEH, where you want to understand as an architect why security is important, why you need to protect things, and how because as an architect you need to know how a hacker could potentially exploit your system. So it's very important you have some sort of technical background on the security side, which is the CEH allows you to do that. And then you get into CISSP. CISSP is as they call it, it's a 1 inch deep and 1 mile wide. What it is basically, it is not an in-depth exposure into every single thing, but it's a larger information bank of things you need to know as a security professional. And it's a very large volume of information you need to assimilate in order to be successful with that certification. But it's really worth it because it gives you there are 10 domains. You need to familiarize with all the domains, which kind of covers all the areas of security. So for somebody starting in security, a very good certification. Specific within CISP, they have something called ISSAP, which is an architecture professional, where they talk about security architecture. But that's for somebody who has already taken CISSP. CISM is a good certification for getting the management overview of security, which allows you to get a picture of, okay, what is a business alignment mean? Why you need to align business with security, as well as how do you establish a governance so that security is consistently followed within an organization. Those kind of concepts are discussed there. It's not a technical certification. It's a kind of a governance / management certification. So it's good for somebody who's been in security for 4 or 5 years to get that. so you can move up the chain, right? And there's some industry-specific ones like the SCADA security architect. The GISE certifications, again, offered by SANS are very, very valued, equal to the CISSPs. But I'm sure you all know that this training is a little bit on the expensive side, but if you up to it or your organization can sponsor it, go for the GISE certifications as well. On an architecture perspective, from an enterprise architecture, there are frameworks available like TOGAF, SABSA, ZACMAN. These are enterprise architecture framework, but they do have security touchpoints. SABSA especially is a framework defined for security. You can look it up, and they do offer some certifications. So that just gives you a little bit more edge in the security architecture side, gives you that beyond the CISP and CISM. Any questions, Niloufer, that we can address?
Been a bunch of comments, but
sure.
Okay. So Reena and I think Riyadh want to know if do you recommend any threat modeling training classes?
Threat modeling training classes, nothing specific. I can probably get back offline if there is a way to do that. But I would say there's some tools there's free tools like Microsoft Threat Modeling tool. You can use that as a base starting point. It allows you to define your system and identify what is under risk. So I would recommend that. Specific training classes, I think I can get back to you on the threat modeling training. Really
so I know a very good trainer. And I will reach out to me. I attended, obviously my company had invited him.
Sure.
But he is extremely, extremely good. He's called Brooke. And I will share via LinkedIn. So reach out to me on LinkedIn if you are interested, and maybe we can set something up, and we can have a class if enough people are interested.
Absolutely, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, go ahead, please.
So this is one thing I promised we will have a more in-depth conversation about. This is currently, as you can see, especially with COVID pandemic, people are working from home, and every organization is establishing a remote access strategy, and they realize that it's all doesn't have to be in the data center anymore. Things are going to move to the cloud, and there is a huge uptick in the cloud adoption by various organizations. So obviously, if the people are moving to the cloud, they need to understand how security is implemented in the cloud. And it's so important, especially things that are not under your control. In data center, you manage your data center, whereas cloud is a shared responsibility model where the cloud service provider is responsible partly for the security, and you're partly responsible. At the end of the day, you as an organization are ultimately responsible for the security, regardless of whether you host it in the data center or in the cloud. So it gives you a little bit more responsibility, and it's a shared responsibility model. So you need to understand things like what are the risks in the cloud. I would strongly recommend people take a look at Cloud Security Alliance's Cloud Controls Matrix, which is a really good comprehensive cloud risks identification and checklist tool. And then what are the different architectures available in the cloud? The various models of cloud implementation, IaaS, PaaS, SaaS models, right? And what are the various risks within that? How is administration done within that? What are the cloud security frameworks, right? CSA again also has a framework for cloud security. So Niloufer, is there any other cloud frameworks that you're familiar with other than the CSF? Are there anything on the CCSP?
You have pretty much covered it,
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, this is very comprehensive.
Good.
And I like Cloud Security Alliance because you can just sign up and even download even study material and stuff for free. And that can be like a very good education in itself.
And it also has a checklist, the cloud security compliance checklist, which controls matrix. And if you're going to a cloud provider, they fill that out. All the cloud providers actually fill out
assessment. It's a self-assessment.
Self-assessment questionnaire. So you can look it up and see which ones are meet your security requirements from an organizational perspective. So how do you do things in the cloud that's differently as opposed to done in the data center. So there's where you have all your technical requirements. uh, how is identity access management done in the cloud? What are the different questions about how, once it moves out of your data center, how do you managing your servers? How is the patch management being done for the servers? If you're using containers in a PaaS environment, how is the containers securely configured? How, the configuration management for the containers. Uh, Once you go to SaaS, you really lose control of the servers and the infrastructure. The SaaS provider does all the security. So you need to do assessment, like use the cloud security matrix assessment to see how is the SaaS provider benchmarking versus other providers. Are they following any standards, best practices? Uh, and you have to start asking the questions to the providers and understand what is the overall security of their, what is the best practice they are following, what are the incident response policies they have. If they ever get compromised, how they are notify your organization. uh, Things like that are very important when you move up the chain from IaaS to SaaS, because now you're giving more responsibility to the cloud security provider, so you need to know what they do. And then again, the native cloud security tools that are available within the various platforms, like you take AWS, they have CloudTrail logging, they have Terraform templates where you can define security as part of the build process. So you have a lot of opportunity. So instead of looking at it, okay, people moving to the cloud, oh, I'm not concerned about security, it's a great opportunity to moving to the cloud. You can do it right, where you can define the things to be built securely from scratch, right? Fixing security after a system is built and go live is done costs typically 5 to 10 times more than fixing it during the build process. So that's something a study has been done. So it's you rather spend more time during the build process, during the design phase, engage with the various teams, try to give them the feedback on the right way to do things. So in order for you to do that, you need to understand the various cloud architectures. You also need to study at least one or two cloud providers designs. I would recommend getting certifications in one of the cloud providers like AWS or Azure, uh, and becoming an architect, solution architect or a solution engineer in their technology allows you to understand it better. So when you're talking to cloud teams, you know what needs to be done and how to do it right, right? So you need to know what needs to be done and how to do it right, right? So both of that is important from security perspective. Uh, and again, from a perspective of how all of this in the business side, what happens when the data moves to the cloud, data sovereignty and things like that, whether the data is going to be residing within the US or going outside of the borders, are we affected by regulations like GDPR? So those kind of things also need to be considered from a cloud architecture perspective. So it's a, once you get into cloud architecture, you are now dealing with a completely different gamut of things that you need to be aware of. And getting a cloud security certification would also be a good thing. Once you understand the cloud, first understand the technology behind the cloud, get some basic cloud certifications on and establish that technical knowledge on cloud, and then get the cloud certification like CCSP or CCSK. One of those will be valuable to get into the cloud security landscape.
Sure. Thank you so much. Um, there is a question, but probably like how to go with web application firewall and DDoS services. How do I practice? Probably like I think OWASP has got a bunch of vulnerable applications. So maybe that could be a good starting point. But what do you feel?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So if you're trying to implement WAF, again, if you're doing it in the cloud, there are a lot of services available. Like Akamai is one of the services. They allow a WAF templates to be built in front of the web services in the deployed in the cloud. But if DDoS is also a requirement, you can add on additional functions like a distributed denial of service available from the same providers. Some of the CSPs also provide DDoS functionality and WAF functionality, but some of the leading providers of WAF also make it available in the cloud. So those are the options if you like to use that. But just a question about, you want to test a vulnerable application, I think I agree with you. Yeah, basically OWASP has some test Billy Goat, and there's other couple of applications where they give you a known vulnerable application where you can just practice against. Use, like, I would recommend, if anybody is trying to do that, they should use download an image of Kali Linux and go against this test application within a closed laptop or in your own private device, private lab environment, where you can build a virtual center and virtual machines or virtual box, something like that. Bring it up, and then you can test within that. That gives you the practice.
So Melvin says that your like extensive and comprehensive scope, we need to be aware in architecture. The only one thing to remove or dispute with the political navigation under leadership section.
Right. I think that's more from it depends on the organization. If you look at it, the CISOs typically do that. So architecture, it really depends on where the architecture function is tied into, and if it's reporting to CISOs, CISOs typically do that. It's more towards, it's more towards that, and you allow the CISO to do that, because at the end of the day, CISO needs to establish the priorities within the organization. Like I said, business alignment with security. A lot of times that the balance tips on where there's more power, right? It's not always like security gets to do everything that we want to do. It's defined by the business vision and how much of risk the business is willing to take. So one of the factors that influence that is something called risk appetite. So risk appetite is how much of risk the business is willing to take in order to be in business, both from a regulatory perspective, both from a threat perspective, and a risk perspective, right? So these will define what is the risk appetite, and that defines what actions they take and what actions they don't take, right? So that's how it typically works out.
Sure. And Abhijit's got some other question about some applications that are vulnerable. See, here's the thing, Abhijit. We are talking about the security architect role, and I don't want to have this side conversation right now. We can definitely reach out to me offline, and we'll discuss and answer your questions. But just now, for the benefit of everybody, we've got like a lot of people on this live streaming live stream right now. So let's stay focused on what is valuable for everybody instead of going down a side channel. So I will answer your questions, but please let's take it offline. Yeah, go ahead, Srikanth, please.
So basically, like I was saying, so let me just give a little bit of clarity on the various type of architect roles. And again, one thing, people come from different backgrounds, right? There are people coming from a network administration, network engineering background. They want to get into security. A perfect opportunity for them, it would be to something like an infrastructure/network security architect. They'll be dealing with firewalls, IDS, denial of service protection, infrastructure security, operating system security, etc. So that would be a good fit, natural fit for them coming from that background. Somebody coming from an application development background, if they already know about coding, they know about programming languages, and they have an interest in security, they can get into more of an application security role. And that application security typically deals with things like secure coding, code review. There are tools available that allows you to do code reviews, and security awareness, making sure the developers understand that how to write the code securely, creating training for them. It's more about awareness. Everybody is trying to deliver a product quickly, and at that point, the last thing they're thinking about is, okay, how do I do it securely, right? So you want to make sure that security is always in their thought. So the awareness is one important thing. And then understanding the architecture at application architecture level. Application architects who spend a lot of time in doing development as a perfect fit for them to get into application security architecture. And another thing that is coming out right now, which is called a CI/CD integration, like continuous integration, continuous deployment pipelines are being built, where application deployments are becoming more agile. Like every week, people deploy application. Every few weeks, people deploy new code. So how do you integrate security into that? And that is another big challenge that application security architects are in a good position to deal with. And that's called CI/CD pipeline integration for security. So when things get deployed automatically, security is built into it. Code security is built into it. Things like static analysis, then dynamic analysis is built into it. So application security architects deal with those kind of things. And then penetration testing, vulnerability assessment, those things also are dealt with by them, and they can work with the developers. So it's more about working with the developers. If somebody came from the background, have the language, the vocabulary to deal with the developers in a far better scenario, right? And then the third is the enterprise security architect, which I would say is more of a business slash technical function, where they're dealing with more of a deal with enterprise architects. If an organization have that function, a lot of organizations just have solution architects. They don't really have enterprise architect. Although large organizations now having that, but if they have that, then working with them and aligning the business requirements, that's where you're now dealing with things like strategic planning, potentially some amount of political navigation or business architectures and those kind of things, and creating the architecture frameworks. Large organizations cannot afford to do mistakes, so they want to have these frameworks established, so they, when new applications are designed already, the technical solution architects know what to do. They don't have to come back to every single time, so there's already a framework defined. So those kind of things it will be dealt with by an enterprise security architect. And then, of course, you have the cloud architect, cloud security architect, which is the new thing that came out, which is kind of both technical and leadership and operational in nature, which allows you to get into the current trend of what's happening in the industry. I would say, I mean, this requires both infrastructure and some amount of application, because the way cloud is deployed in itself is all code based. There is no physical implementations anymore. There's no manually setting up servers. There's no manually deploying applications. Everything is based on APIs. So when you want to build an Amazon image, you use templates, and you make sure the templates are securely configured, and then you deploy servers. So people are deploying servers every minute, right? So there's no way you can go into individual server and figure things out. So that's where some amount of programming knowledge will be useful for a cloud security architect role. I would recommend learning a language like Python. Even if you are from an infrastructure background, just learn Python. Everybody's finding it very useful, especially doing some basic scripting, figuring out the things are configured securely. You want to do that like for thousands of servers. You don't want to go there, sit and do that spreadsheet, right? You want to be able to leverage some skills you have, deploy that using API, and get that data you're looking for and come back with results quickly. So that's will be one useful skill set for cloud security architecture, and understanding the cloud environments. That's very, very important. I cannot stress the importance of that. Trying to understand what are the various services available in the cloud service provider that we're talking about, Amazon or AWS. Various Amazon has like thousands of services. Even I would be surprised if anybody knows all the services, what it does, and how you can leverage it. And developers are going to figure out faster because they know they're trying to use more and more. So you need to also catch up from a security function perspective.
Sure. So we have a question. It says, which additional tools and skill sets are used by security architect if someone has to transition from a solution architect to a security architect?
Okay. So some of the tools, if you look at it, I think I would say the architecture, the frameworks is the real tool that the architects use. Understanding the NIST framework, there are tools available from NIST itself where NIST allows you to do self-assessment. So that is one tool. Second thing is the threat modeling tool that I mentioned about. Microsoft threat modeling tool is one example. There are a lot of threat modeling tools available, commercial ones as well. So that's one tool you need to know. And then there are other tools that allows you to do architecture based on risk. There's a tool called Archer, RSA Archer, which is basically allows you to, if an enterprise has a whole overall risk management program and they measure risk using some tool, so they allow you to model all the risks into a system, and you can do reporting based on that, and then you can use that information when you're doing the architecture. So knowing how to use Archer a risk management tool or a governance tool also is a valuable skill set.
Yes, Archer is useful because it is deployed like, very widely.
Yeah.
And it has got like various modules, like what Srikanth was mentioning. It's got like a way to handle exceptions. It's used for your SOX reporting, and there are various modules. But yeah, it is, from a tools perspective, yes, definitely knowing Archer will provide you with a little bit of edge, Okay, any diagramming tool? That is, again,
I think you
your
can use
personal
Visio.
preference. Yeah.
Visio is one good tool, and I've heard of a tool called Archimate, which is also used for architecture diagrams.
Yes.
So if you're doing architecture, some of the threat modeling tools, I'm familiar with a tool called IRIS Risk, which allows you to actually do when you define the application within the system, it allows you to create a nice diagram. It outputs as a Visio. So threat modeling tools, some of them actually have the capability when they create the infrastructure details to allow you to do architecture diagrams. And from a high level perspective, if you're talking about it, if you're creating security architecture blueprint and things like that, I would use Visio, of course, the regular office tools to create that type of artifacts.
Okay, thank you so much. Like, have you concluded this, or like, are you?
I mean, let me just check whether we can cover one or two more slides.
Okay, sure. Go ahead, please.
Sure. So I wanted to just give a high-level overview of the security architecture process, right? How does it really work, and how does it interlink with the regular business and IT processes, right? So typically, what happens is you identify the business strategy and business requirements, which is a business analyst role. Somebody in an organization is trying to figure out what the IT has to do, and then you define what is the overall IT strategy, the governance related to that, and that kind of dictates what an IT architecture looks like. That's where the IT architects or enterprise architects are working to figure out how the architecture should look like. And security architecture just falls in that same line, where they're working with IT architects, making sure security functions are built into that, into the IT architecture itself, right? And then what are the inputs that are taken by the security architecture folks is primarily the business requirement define the risk strategy of the organization, how much of risk the organization is willing to take, which defines what controls are need to be put in to make sure that the risk is within the limits of what the organization is willing to take. That's where the controls comes in from a risk side. And then also the risk also defines what the policies are. If the organization cannot have any user use USB drives in their USB ports in their computer, that's a decision that business drives, and that becomes a policy. And that policy defines what standards that the organization needs to have in terms of a desktop standard or a laptop standard, image, which disables all USB drives, right? And that defines what controls need to be there. And that is actually another input into the security architecture. And that's how the closed loop is defined. So you have a risk-based approach, and then you have your standards-based approach. Another feed into the architecture is also the threat, which comes from external source. These are all internal sources. There's an external source where what actually affects the organization, what is the potential exposure, who are against the potentially trying to hack into the organization. That factor also comes in. Then you put all these things together, then you define a solution from a security perspective. So this is the overall security architecture process for people who just want to get familiar with this.
Srikanth, you saved the best for last. So this was really good because it provides like in-depth understanding to people who've joined here about what the whole process is and how it works, which is really priceless. I have a bunch of questions coming in.
Sure.
So one is, like you mentioned Python. So please tell us what package is good for cybersecurity. This is from Latha. So she wants to know, are you recommending any particular package, or I
You're
just
talking about like a language, programming
no, like you
language?
got like a bunch of Python has got like different packages, right? So I think like
Oh, packages.
yeah,
I mean, nothing. I would say just knowing how to program in Python, the basics. It's not like any specific modules. It's about how do you like automate things? How do you?
automate.
It's more like scripting. How do you do things? I mean, you don't need to know Python to develop an application or use it to create a module or use a module to specifically, develop an application. You are just trying to automate things, so it's more of an auxiliary skill, not necessarily a primary skill. It will be useful. You need to know all the other things that we talked about. It's just an additional thing which will allow you to do things quickly as you do the work, and especially in the cloud security environment. Yeah,
Sure.
it
And
goes
I
50.
think Python, yeah, please go
Go
ahead.
ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I think Python is very versatile because, I mean, just like knowing it doesn't matter in which area of cybersecurity you work, you
Correct.
will come across some place where, you just for your personal work, also, you just want to automate something. And this comes in really handy.
Right.
And okay, there is another question, which is how mature is Cloud Security Alliance? Um, and
I
then
would say, yeah, go ahead. If there is any ancillary question.
no, the other one is about Python. Do we need to learn how to code or just scripting? And I think
No, I think just scripting is what you really need to know. And then, of course, up to your interest, you want to develop something additionally, then you could learn. But scripting is what I would be the application that Python will be used for. And answering the question on the Cloud Security Alliance, I think Cloud Security Alliance has been there for many years. It's probably in the fourth revision of their controls matrix. It's very mature. They have addressed a lot of the risks, and it's also the good part about it is they're driven by the community. So it's your inputs and my inputs and everybody's inputs as they use cloud is being put into that process. The way they have a feedback process, so they have kind of documenting those inputs, which is nice because it's not necessarily just one person dictating things. It's a very community driven organization, so that's why I like that. Yeah, definitely, I think they have covered a lot of the cloud risks very well.
yes, thank you so much. And thanks, everybody. Next week, we are going to have another cybersecurity career talk with Shabir Bashir, and he's going to talk about the various roles that he's transitioned from. Because in cybersecurity, when you start off, it's not going to be the same career path. You will change depending on the circumstances, depending on what you learn, what you like to do. So we're going to talk with him and learn how versatile you need to be and how to adapt to changes that are coming in. Thanks so much. And thank you so much, Srikanth. I really appreciate it. And thank you on behalf of everybody here today.
Thank you. Really appreciate it. If there's any questions, you can hit link us on come up on LinkedIn, ask questions. We'll be happy to share whatever knowledge we can to help you out. Thank you again, Niloufer, for this opportunity. Really humbled and honored to be able to work with you and help the community that you're helping to get on board into cybersecurity.
Thank you.
Thank you.